right, hello, good morning, how are you all? Thank you for the organization for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be in France. I just can't believe it. So let me start by asking you a question. How many of you are using an open source tooling for your day-to-day work? Yeah, right. It's almost impossible to be a developer without using a tooling like, I don't know, NPM or Maven. And how many of you are using an open source framework? Yeah, right. Who's not using, I don't know, Spring Boot or React or Bootstrap? And how many of you are using an open source language? Yeah, Java, PHP, JavaScript, right? This is something amazing, right? We are all using open source. A few years ago, this would have been impossible. But how many of you have ever contributed to an open source project, even one line? And how many of you are actively contributing to open source? Yeah, right, like 1% probably. And this makes a lot of sense because there is absolutely no one contributing to open source. Let's take Java, for example. There are 3 billion Java devices on the world. There are also 20 million Java developers. So guess how many OpenJDK contributors there are? Any guess? 240. So 240 people, just a handful of people, are deciding the language that 20 million developers are developing on. And of course, you could think that this is a problem, but you can also take it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for absolutely every one of you to participate on open source. The doors are open, and it can completely change your careers and your lives. As it did with my career when I started contributing to Bootstrap, and eventually I became one of the core contributors of the project, one of the 9 that they are active now, and that completely changed my career and my life. And I wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for a couple of mentors I had on my way. And these are my mentors, or the people that made me contribute to open source. The first one on the left, his name is Bruno. He used to work on a bank as a security engineer. Anyone here is working on a bank or has worked on a bank before? Well, the banking industry, it's really restricted, right? As a security engineer, he was following policies. It was really hard for him to do any innovation. It was really political and bureaucratic. So he started contributing to an open source project called Torquebox. And through these contributions, he took the attention of a company called Red Hat that eventually hired him for a very small open source project called AeroGear. Now, eventually now he's one of the leaders of a project called Keynote, a security project within Red Hat. But the point is that he's just like us, right? He bootstrapped his career by participating in open source, and he doesn't have anything special. He's my friend, right? He's a really good developer, but that's it, right? And probably my favorite story of open source is the one of the person beside him. His name is Daniel. Daniel, 7 years ago, he started contributing to a very small open source project called AeroGear. And eventually, he's an Android developer, and eventually the manager of the community saw that 80% of the Android code was written by Daniel. So he offered him a job. And Daniel said no. So Jay scratched his head, right? He understood why was someone that really loved the project was saying no to a well-paying job working for a company as cool as Red Hat remotely for a project that he already loved. He was already contributing for free. So he asked, and Daniel told him that he was saying no because he didn't speak English. He was just contributing to the community by using Google Translate. He was translating every single bit of communication on the mailing list and on comments on the code and sending it to the community. So the manager of the project wasn't ready to lose a really good developer, so he offered him the job anyway, and he sent an English teacher to his house every single week. Now, Daniel today, he lives in Canada. He's a developer for Shopify, and he's working and living in English, right, 7 years after. And the two of them, as I mentioned, were my mentors when I started working on open source. I thought it was impossible, right? I mean, I'm a designer, so how could I really become an open source member? So I was hired by Red Hat to improve the user experience of a very small community called AeroGear. And the first thing I did as a designer, I was really eager to show what I knew. So I downloaded the code from GitHub to my computer. Then I made some changes on the CSS. And then I zipped the file and I sent it back to the community mailing list. Of course, they didn't know what to do with that, right? How could they consume what I was sending? So at first, they made some jokes. But eventually, they taught me how to do Git. And they had patience with me as I destroyed the repository every time I had to do a rebase for like almost a year. But they pushed me to contribute to other projects, and eventually I started contributing to Bootstrap. Now, in less than 2 weeks, I was a 100 top contributor to Bootstrap, which is something really easy to do. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. In less than 3 months, I was one of the team members of the project. And that's because there is absolutely no one contributing to open source. There is a huge opportunity for all of you to bootstrap your careers by contributing to open source. And that gave me credibility, right? I went from being just a person that knew CSS to a core contributor to the largest CSS code base in the world. So when I said something, people believed me, right? I wasn't just some dude from Argentina. I was like the guy that was contributing to Bootstrap. It changed my career, and it changed my life. Nowadays, I'm the leader of the team that creates the dashboard at Auth0. I'm a contributor to Bootstrap. I'm a contributor to the Eclipse Foundation. And I wrote some articles for CSS Tricks and List Apart. And this wouldn't have happened for me if I hadn't had the chance to participate on open source. So today, I would like to show you how you all have the same opportunity as I had, as my friend had, to participate in open source and to change your careers. Does it sound fair enough? So let's start by defining what open source is. And open source is basically a community, right? It's a community of people that are passionate about something, and they gather together to build something. And open source has historically been revolving around developers, mainly because code is the most obvious contributions that anyone can do to build a software. But by no means, software is only made out of code. Una Kravitz, who is an amazing open source designer, said that diversity is what can take open source from what it is to where it could be. And she's not only talking about diversity of mindsets like designers and developers, but also diversity of cultures, races, or even different people right from different parts of the world. Any one of them alone will produce something worse than all of them together. Designers, for example, are really vital to create any piece of software. They will defend the users and have a unique point of view. I mean, if you think about it, mostly all the contributors to a project, they are users of the project. And as we saw, they are just a tiny group of people. So designers will defend the users, even though those that cannot be contributing to a project, and then keep them front of mind as we take all the decisions. Now, writers are completely vital, right? Because let's face it, both designers and developers, we just suck at writing. And if you don't believe me, go to any open source project, try to read the documentation, and you will know that there is a problem there. But communication is vital, right? Especially on an environment that we are all communicating from different parts of the world in an async way. And most common than not, we are using a language that is not our first language. And sometimes the writers of communities, they become heroes or they become superstars. For example, my friend Gircham, he's from the Netherlands. He used to be a technical writer on the NetBeans community. And through his guides and documentations and sample apps and things that he wrote, he helped thousands of developers to find their way on the NetBeans project. Now, eventually, he became one of the most acclaimed persons of the community. And remember that without communication, there is no community. And what we write and what we say can be the difference between someone feeling welcome in our project or someone being rejected. Now, if you want to contribute and you don't want to write code, there is a ton of things to do, right? There is a ton of administrative work to do, like reviewing PRs, tagging issues, or helping the community on Stack Overflow and chats or forums. For example, in Bootstrap, we have two people. The first one is Johan. He's from France, and he's always tagging issues and replying to users, apart from him being a vital person on the JavaScript part of Bootstrap, but he's there for the community. And the other one, I wish I could pronounce his name, Geeks or whatever. He's always on the chat of Bootstrap, helping the users find their ways. And they are not really writing a ton of code, but they are vital for the community. And if it were for them, probably Bootstrap wouldn't be what it is today. So hopefully by now, I show you that you all have a place on open source. But why am I even recommending you working for free on an environment that is going to leave you vulnerable with complete strangers? Well, open source is first and foremost an act of love. It's a contribution that you are giving back to the industry. And you can have a huge impact. Let's say, for example, the case of Your Way, right? Every single student there, primary student, they get a computer. And the software and the environment that they are using, it's driven by the community, it's completely open source. Now, here in France, there is a project that took that environment and ported it to be working on any device, not only the computers that they are giving for free on schools. And that's making a huge impact on the society. But apart from that, you also get things for yourself. One of the main things that you get as professionals are your connections, right? Your network. And open source opens a huge network of people around the world that can help you out. And I mean, let's face it, even though we live in really cool countries where there are active communities and we have these kind of events, we just don't live in San Francisco, right? So open source gets you the opportunity to work with people completely from any part of the world that they are passionate about what they do. And at the end of the day, every single superstar of our industry, the people that we follow and that we respect and we listen to what they have to say, they are all participating on open source. So if you want to work alongside them, if you want to see what they do, if you want them to criticize your code, the doors are open, right? I mean, let's face it, there is no one contributing to open source. So if you just step in, you will be working alongside with them. Now, the other thing that it allows you is to show what you know. And I mean, even though getting the job should not be your motivation to participate in open source, there are many cases where people got jobs because they participated in open source. And you don't have to go through a million interviews, and you don't have to have studied on a fancy university to have the opportunity to get a job through open source. You just show what you know. I mean, if you think about it, let's remember my friend Daniel, right? He didn't knew English. Now, in order to work at Red Hat, English is mandatory. You wouldn't even have your first interview if you don't know English. Now, he got a job because he had the opportunity to show what he knew without having a block, right? He just went there, developed something, showed what he knew, and he got a job. Now, the other reason for participating in open source is to have a game, right, a toy. You have the opportunity to play with bleeding edge technology on a scale that it would have been impossible to get on a personal project or on a hackathon. And finally, it's really hard for me to describe your feeling when you see your name attached to an open source project, but it becomes addictive, right? I mean, the few of you that actually participate in open source, you know the feeling. Once you see your name attached to a project that is just larger than yourself, then it becomes something addictive. My first contribution to Bootstrap was 7 letters. There was a missing default flag on a variable or on a SAS variable. And when I saw my name related to the project, and I knew that it would have impact thousands of different projects using Bootstrap, it became addictive. It was a feedback loop that I just wanted to give more. In fact, how many of you have ever used Bootstrap in a project? Yeah, well, you are all using my 7 letters I wrote 4 years ago. So now that you know you have a place on open source and you know you're getting something back, let's talk about finding your community. And probably this is the hardest thing to do. So my recommendation is to choose the thing that you like and you use. If you're passionate about something, chances are that there are other people that have the same needs and they are passionate about the same thing and they are gathering together to build something. So if you're crazy as I am and you like CSS, there are things like Bootstrap, Foundation, Bulma, Material Design, Tachyons, or many other projects that you can choose from. I chose Bootstrap not only because it gave me the chance of writing CSS on a platform which it's a scale that I would have not found in another place, but also because at the time I was working on a project that had Bootstrap as a dependency. So by contributing to Bootstrap when I wanted a new feature or when I saw a problem, I was not only fixing my local environment, but also fixing and improving the whole community. Now, if, for example, you're working on a Java project and you have as a dependency Spring Boot, for example, then contributing to Spring Boot would be a logical place to do. Now, if you don't know where to go, there are projects there are pages like the GitHub Explorer, where you can find open source communities. And also, there is a project called Code Triage, where you can go there and type your language, for example, JavaScript or Java, and you're going to see a list of issues that you can work on. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which project you choose. There are 3 things really important whenever you engage a community. Now, the first one is to have respect. A friend of mine, his name is Brian Litham. He works at Netflix and he's a huge open source developer. He once told me that working on open source is like working within a fishbowl. Everything you do is going to be transparent, it's going to be visible, and it's going to get registered or logged. So when you engage a community, you should see the code of conduct and see if they are respectful for you, right? The whole community. And if they're not, then, and the main contributors to the community, they don't do anything about this disrespect, then this is probably a place that you should not be at, and you should look for another place. Now, having said that, you should build a thick skin, because you're going to be in a place where you're going to be criticizing other people, and other people are going to be criticizing you. So that's why having good communication is key. Now, think about it. You're going to be working alongside people from any part of the world where different cultures have different styles of speaking, right? Sometimes if you are really direct, it means that you are being respectful. And in other places, being direct is considered a lack of respect. So, for example, at Bootstrap, we have a contributor who is from Japan, and then another one who is from Belgium. Now, when they talk to each other, they have really interesting conversations. Like one is going to be really direct, the other one is going to like talk around in circles. But the thing is that since they really deeply care about the project and they come with positive energies, then the results are just amazing. And the third thing is to have trust. Now, as you start working on open source, you will see that the few people that are working there, they trust each other. And to build trust, you need to start with very small contributions. I'm going to talk more about this later on, But this is going to be key, right? If you come to a community, always start with small contributions, show what you know, and gain the trust of the community. Now, a really good example of these principles is my friend Ottavio. Now, Ottavio, a few years ago, he used to work on a government agency. Anyone here works on a government? No? Okay, well, you can probably imagine how it is, right? He was in a very bureaucratic place where he wanted to do something and it was just politics after politics. And every time he built something cool, he was telling me, I built something really cool, and then it never gets implemented. It just stays there forever. I mean, we all live through these situations, right? We work a lot on a feature or something, and then it never sees the light or never sees production. So eventually he thought, I need to change this. I'm going to contribute to an open source project. So he's crazy enough to go to the Linux kernel mailing list, and he tried to learn Linux and C by doing that. Now, he was super disrespected by the community, and he couldn't learn anything, so he left. Now, he joined the OpenJDK project, the mailing list, and he started chatting with people there, and that's how he learned Java. Now, today, he's a Java champion. He speaks all over the world. He's a multiple winner of the the community JCP project. And he's just an amazing open source developer. And he did that, right, by learning things on the way. He was humble enough. He trusted the community. He respected the community. And he communicated really, really well. So now that you all know how to find a community, then the rest is pretty easy, right? You need to know the tools, and probably you already know the tools to contribute to open source. They are really easy. The first one is to know Git, to know the command line, and to know to use a communication channel. Now, if I'm contributing to open source, and I'm not even a developer, then you all can do it. So let's start with the command line, right? You need to know a basic knowledge of the command line. And by basic, I mean really basic. I mean, I can do it, so you all can do it. Now, if you don't know how to use the command line, I highly recommend this book, Working the Command Line by Remy Sharp. It's really good, it's really basic. So if you want to pick it up, then that's a really good start. Now, the second thing is Git. Git is the language of the open source. And you need to know probably also basic Git commands. Eventually, it becomes harder when you start doing rebases. As I mentioned before, I learned the hard way. But Git is something that you will have to know. I highly recommend learning Git on the command line, even though there are desktop applications. The learning curve is steeper, but the benefits are huge. Now, you will need a GitHub account just because most open source projects are held in GitHub. And if you don't know Git, there is a page called try.github.io where you can find cheat sheets and books and really good resources to learn Git. Now, the final thing is a communication channel. And each community is going to be different. Some of them are really active on mailing lists. For example, on Bootstrap, we have Slack to chat in with different, with the contributors. Then we discuss code on issues and pull requests on GitHub. And then the users, they communicate on forums on Stack Overflow. So basically now you are ready. You find your community and you know the tools. So let's talk about how to make your first steps. And if there is just one thing you take away from this talk, remember this: to start with small contributions. And the tinier they are, the better. And this is something I learned from a really good friend of mine who is here on the picture. His name is Eder. Eder used to work on an agency where he had to change clients every single quarter. So one of these clients was a bank, and he had to introduce a decision engine, and he chose Jules. So as he was working with Jules, he also started contributing to a project. And what he told me was that he started contributing things that nobody else wanted to contribute, like documentation and tests and really, really small contributions. That's how eventually he became a part of the Drugs community, and now he's the leader of one of the BPM toolings at Red Hat. But the point is that he did this, right? He did whatever nobody else wants to do. So think about documentation. Who likes to write documentation? Absolutely no one. So the fact is that well, maybe if you are a technical writer, you do, right? But probably not if you are a developer. So think about it this way. Documentation are always out of date, absolutely always. So if you just go to an open source project, you read it through, you try to install it, chances are that you're going to fail. So if you fix that, the community is going to love you. It's a really good entry point, it's a really good contribution to do, and it's going to be one commit at the end of the day. And as I'm going to show you next, one commit is one commit. It doesn't really matter if it's a huge PR with a huge feature or just like a typo on the documentation. Think about tests. I mean, usually people don't like to write tests, or translations, right? Translations, I know in French, but in Spanish they are huge. The translation of React in Spanish, it's extremely popular. So again, start with very, very small commits. The tinier they are, the better. Now, if you really want to write code, there are tags on issues. There is one called good first issue or help wanted that you can look for them on communities, and they are usually really easy entry points to any open source project. And again, if you don't want to write code, please do administrative work. I mean, going through issues, replying to users, or reviewing PRs, that's vital to any open source community. So after you make your first steps, it starts to, oh, I forgot about this one. So, right, so one of my first contributions to Bootstrap was changing the border radius of the buttons from 50 rems to 50%. And if you know CSS, what that makes is making the bottom, instead of rounded corner, an oval shape, right? And I should have known that. So I made this change, I sent it to Bootstrap, and eventually Mark Otto, who is the creator of Bootstrap and also the director of design at GitHub, he went and created a code pen for me to learn what I was doing wrong. I mean, his reaction should have been go and learn CSS and then come back and send us something, but he took the time and he had respect for my contributions. So the point is that as you make contributions, you might get it wrong, like I did, right? And that's okay. I mean, failing on the way, it's part of it. So making your first steps and doing things wrong, it's okay, and the community is going to support you. Mainly, again, because there is no one participating on open source, and we really want people to do it. So now we can talk about what's next. So you make your first steps, and you got it there. You put some PRs or whatever. So now it's time to leveling up. And I'm going to show you a secret. You don't have to make a ton of contributions to become one of the top open source developers in the world. I mean, let's take React, for example. It's being used by thousands of developers around the world, if not millions. But the React community is only 1,000 people. And if you want to make a contribution, if you make only 6 contributions, you are a top 100 of the list of contributors. And instead of talking about that, let me just show you. So, I don't know if you can see this. Is its font large enough? Okay, so here is React. It has 1,300 contributors. And if I see a list of top 100 contributors, of course, the first one are Facebook employees, so they have like tons of commits. But if I scroll down, you can see that by making 6 commits, like this person here, you're already one of the top 100 contributors of React, which is, I mean, one of the largest open source communities around. I mean, I'm a hiring manager, and if I get someone that is contributing to React, I'm probably going to have a look at that, right? I mean, he probably knows JavaScript better than other people. And those contributions can be nothing, can be just typos that he changed on the project. Let's say, I mean, how many of you are Java developers? Cool. So any one of you is using Spring Boot? Yeah, so Spring Boot has, I think, 600 contributors. Now, again, the first ones are Pivotal employees. If I scroll down, if you do 3 commits, you are one of the top 100 contributors of Spring Boot. That person there, he made 3 changes on typos. It's +3 and -3. So, I mean, and he's there, right? He's improving the community. Now, let's take another one, smaller projects. Reactive Java, it has about 300 contributors. Then again, if I scroll down, if you make 2 contributions, you are one of the top 100 contributors of this community. Probably if you make 3, let's see, you are one of the top 50 contributors of Reactive Java. Or this Wava, right, from Google, the framework, it has 300 contributors. If you make only 1 contribution to this project, you are one of the top 100. Take this guy here, Adrian. He made 1 change of 1 character. He deleted something, and that's it, right? That's something nobody can take away from him. He's one of the top 100 contributors of one of the largest open source Java projects in the world. And I took this to practice. So let's take this project here, parse server. Now remember, I'm a designer. I don't know JavaScript at all, right? I don't know how to code. I just don't. Now, if you look at this community here, and you type my name, I'm the number 82 contributor, and I made 2 commits. Now, my commits were changes on the documentation. The first one is a change on the markdown file that is bad formatting. The second one is more interesting. I tried to run this project, and I couldn't. And that's a barrier, right? If it's a barrier for me, it's a barrier for any one of you. So I just added 4 lines of documentation to know like how to run it. It's super basic, right? I did the same with DocuServe. This is a project by Facebook to run documentations for open source projects. Now, again, I tried to run it, and the documentation was out of date, or it was just strangely written. So I rewrote it to make it way more simple. Now, even at Bootstrap, I didn't have to make a ton of contributions to be a core team member. This is me. I made 53 contributions. And when I became a core team member, I was at like 20-ish or something like that. So there is a lot of room for absolutely every one of you to be here, right? There is no one contributing on open source. And that can make a change on your careers. So one of the main things I hear people saying is that they don't have time. And I agree. I mean, we don't, right? I mean, when are we going to do this? So I'm going to propose you something. Go to your calendar and see wherever you have half an hour. Like half an hour between meetings, that half an hour that you use it for nothing. And block it to start making a contribution to open source. Maybe that half an hour can be the half an hour that is going to change your careers. And remember that absolutely everyone who is a star of our industry, it's already contributing to open source. So maybe the next superstar of our industry is here in this room. And it only started because you dedicated half an hour a week to make a contribution to open source. So open source is open, and it has a huge room for absolutely everybody to be there. So if you want to make your first steps, just do them. If you need help, trust your community, they are going to help you out. If you need me to help you, follow me on Twitter, and then I'm going to help you, or I'm going to be here until Sunday, so chat with me, right? It's really, really easy to do it. So I hope this is going to be the start of your journey on open source, and thank you very much for having me here today.